Hello. Today we're going to talk about 4 trends in editing creative online. And these are DIY or do-it-yourself, which is perceived in different ways in the world, but is a major thing. And in the space of content creation, we're really focusing on that aspect of do-it-yourself. Crowdsourcing of assets and templates, which has probably always been around, but is a real trend these days and very established at this point. Repurposing and reuse of content, which is has many meanings, but we'll talk about it mostly in the context of documents and images. And finally, automation of creative processes. These 4 trends are going to be seen across 3 use cases, and these are the editing real editing stories, places where we have deep experience in our 20 years of building online editing solutions. And branded collateral is the first one, which is really the time when you're strictly adhering to a brand and can't be too creative. I mean, people were creative when they created a template, but then once it's created, end users can make edits to the content, not the presentation. And the other extreme of freeform creative authoring, where you can go wild and people are editing online with more and more freedom. Then finally, looking at hybrid solutions and how these two combine. There are 3 of us on this call. I am the co-founder of Silicon Publishing. Olaf Kvern is the author of Real World Indesign, and he worked at Adobe for many years before joining us here at Silicon Publishing. Mike Zahorik is still at Adobe and leads the Indesign Server product, which is dear to our hearts. Oli, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Oh, sure. I've been working in computer graphic arts since 1986, and I realize that probably means that I'm older than some of the participants. Like Max said, I co-wrote with Real World Indesign, and back in the day, Real World PageMaker, Real World Freehand, other books like that. I worked at Adobe on InDesign scripting and automation. And I've been at Silicon Publishing since 2011. So that's it for me.
Hey, I'm Mike Zahorik. I'm Business Development Manager from Adobe. I've been with Adobe also a long time, and I've worked pretty extensively with solutions partners that really address a lot of the topics we're going to hear about on the call today by extending InDesign primarily, but other Adobe products to meet some of these needs. So looking forward to discussing the topics today.
Great. So let's get started. The first topic is DIY content creation. That's the first trend. And this trend is known in other contexts. Home improvement is probably the first place people think of when they hear DIY. And in the 50s, that was a big thing. It's still a big thing. It still is probably the main DIY stereotype. In the 60s and 70s, it was applied to culture and fashion and music and stuff like that. So DIY is popular in many places, but in our world, we're talking about DIY content, and that has evolved for quite some time, starting way back in the day. The printing press wasn't exactly do-it-yourself. It was enabling churches to disperse their content with more consistency and to a broader base. But over time, that printing press got to be used by, first rich people, nobles and such, and then it trickled down to normal people over centuries. The exciting time that Mike and Oli and I have been part of is since the advent of the laser printer and the Macintosh and PostScript. And when these tools came along, people really had power, and it was quite liberating. Oli, do you want to speak a little bit about your experience with this?
Oh, well, I worked on PageMaker at Aldus, again, back starting in 1987. And before that, I'd worked in graphic arts, doing typesetting and layout. And it used to be that getting your material into print was an incredibly difficult thing, and most of it looked pretty bad. When these four technologies showed up at pretty much the same time, suddenly just the cost of getting into print dropped by orders of magnitude, and suddenly people were buying the Macintosh to get PageMaker and connect it with PostScript equipped laser printers. So it was a huge deal. It went from everything was very much controlled by what you could afford to a huge price drop in availability of typesetting and publishing.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a bit of experience back then as well, and it was just absolutely liberating to work on some of the first laser printers. Just the experience of typing and seeing it come out in really beautiful print made you feel very powerful. And then here's the quiz section. I don't think we have a quiz for real, but I'm curious who's seen this document before. If you haven't, check it out. It's the original proposal for the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee. And it's funny, when the web came out, if you read this proposal, it was very much about DIY or independence of communication. It wasn't a broadcast medium. The web was not conceived as a broadcast medium, but when it came out initially, it was certainly received like one by companies who really saw the web as a place to publish their brochures. And so the many of the early websites were really like, hey, I've got another channel to make a brochure with. And then over time, it became increasingly two-way to the point of the social media explosion. And that kind of really brought the vision to where Berners-Lee had wanted it to go, and probably further than he wanted it to go. But it certainly enabled publishing at a personal level that was extremely powerful, to the point where nowadays a single person, even a kid, can have a greater following than a major media channel. So that's DIY, and that's a trend we see entrenched and growing. Crowdsourcing is the next one, and that's something that's probably been around a long time, but it is definitely getting known more and more, and has certainly the last 20 years grown up. The idea is to let people contribute content to your effort, and these can be clients or partners or third parties, but it came about very organically. And in the world of stock photos and templates, microstock is the classic story. iStock Photo came about completely organically. This guy just wanted to share his images with his friends on his website in about 2000, and his fellow photographers joined him, and they did this, and they just hit big hosting bills. So they thought, well, what are we going to do to pay the hosting bills? We'll just have everyone pay a quarter. And that worked so well, it became a company and a whole way of life, and people copied it, and microstock has really taken off. That led to the buzzword crowdsourcing. In 2005, it was coined. So it's a word that's very common now, but it was actually invented relatively recently, 15 years ago. Hobbyists, part-timers, and dabblers suddenly have a market for their efforts as smart companies and industries as disparate as pharmaceuticals and television discover ways to tap the latent talent of the crowd. The labor isn't always free, but it costs a lot less than paying traditional employees. It's not outsourcing, it's crowdsourcing. And so Jeff Howe is credited with that term. And it's really here. It's here, and we saw it soon after that in our work, making solutions for people. And it's funny how different companies go about crowdsourcing. Some of them, we were part of the early explosion with Template Cloud in England in the early 2000s. They were doing cloud sourcing, and they saw it very commerce centric, where they were trying to encourage designers to sell their stuff through their system. They thought that the designers could provide the content and make money off of it, and they tempted them all to get in and make money. And they didn't think so much about curation. They really thought, let's get a lot of people involved, and they can sell, and things will rise to the top based on popularity. Others we saw more successful in this space were much more obsessed with quality, and they still managed to curate intensively. Even if people could sell on their site, they would not just take anything. So we saw some success with people who were more focused on things like a design contest, where they would encourage people to win the contest or become designer of the week. And those companies really did some wonderful things, and some of them were quite successful in the crowdsourcing space. So at this point, crowdsourcing is well established and unlikely to go away. Again, it's probably not a new concept. If you look at the history, some people say that, it goes back to democracy itself as a crowdsourcing mechanism. So there may be other ways people interpreted it and did it over time. It's natural to get, a community to contribute to some effort, but in the place of content and online editing, crowdsourcing is a relatively recent trend that is still growing. The third one, and this is just part of the explosion of devices and media, but repurposing and reuse of content is even now still expanding, and this has been a major headache in the publishing industry, and a joy as well. But for better or worse, content goes everywhere now, and there seems to be a new definition of everywhere over time. So this webinar, how many sizes of ad do we need to promote the webinar? Too many. And in the news, there's the metaverse again. It's been around for years, but now it's reaching the hype level. So where is this all headed? There are so many dimensions even. It's not just that you're reaching these 3 targets or 10 targets or X targets, but there are dimensions to it, where it can also be video over time, or it can be animation, or it can be interactive. And to make it even worse, personalization is a real phenomenon. So sometimes you're sending your communication across many channels, many devices, many formats to people, and you're tailoring it to them in these many formats. So it just multiplies. Mike, do you have any, you must have experience with personalization with InDesign Server.
Yeah, I think this is an area that is kind of underutilized still. Most people think of personalization more around direct mail type pieces, but it has many different forms. I think one angle of this is just thinking about manufacturing and the the rapid rise of digital presses allows a job of one. So you can create something that is completely unique and personal to yourself. That can be it could be printed on paper, but it could be something put onto a coffee cup or a T-shirt, a beer label. There's any number of things where personalization is now possible through digital printing. I think another aspect of this is moving beyond in InDesign, at least, moving beyond just replacing variables and thinking about how content can be composed from templates to create targeted pieces. So, for example, sending the consumer something that is unique to them. So this is all possible today with personalization and programming that Silicon Publishing can provide, as these examples show.
Yeah, we have deep experience with that. Go ahead.
Sorry. And it's not just printed materials and online materials, but for example, laser cut materials and 3D printed materials, whether there's just a whole lot of stuff. I mean, I use InDesign to produce 3D content for my various hobbies.
Yep.
Yes, we hope to move into that. It's fun to see just the one-off, the fact that you can produce a one-off book. We were working with Amazon Create Space with Adobe, and they can make money off producing a single book, which is just, again, talking about DIY, the ability to publish single things is amazing. And working with InDesign Server, we can automate the traditional direct mail stuff with real power. I mean, these are 3 different offers. They came from one single template, which is very smart. It knows, like, okay, if it's cable, color it like this. if the letter goes a certain length, we'll fill in the white space by scaling up the image. Or if you can't fit an image, remove the image. I mean, so this is all coming from one template dynamically. And we've seen the extremes in the personalized content space, where if it's a casino, they'll send you a picture. They know all about you, by the way, and they will send you a picture of the meal you last ate with the game you last played, and everything about you is reflected in a message that's just for you. So repurposing and reuse is huge and dizzying. It's multidimensional, and there are so many possibilities. So at some point you pick your outputs and your channels and your degree of personalization and your degree of interactivity. But that's one of the four trends that is really upon us and central to most online editing at this point. You have to know where everything is going. Finally, automation of creative processes is dear to our hearts. It's really getting kind of scary with artificial intelligence, but the power is there, and it's a double-edged sword. It's got good and bad to it. In the very beginning, and when we started this company, InDesign was brand new. One of the things that was really just enjoyable for us was the fact that it was putting typography back into print. We had experience with real print and the ancient flavors of typesetting. When word processing had come out, it really butchered typography because it was really mimicking a typewriter. What InDesign, Quark, and PageMaker did was mimic typesetting, the craft of typesetting, and there's a fair amount of artificial intelligence right there already in Adobe InDesign. Oli, can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, sure. We don't generally think of something like a drop cap as automation, but it is. It's doing a whole bunch of things that even in the first wave of desktop publishing would have been a whole bunch of different steps to do. You'd have to move the character out of the text flow, enlarge it, wrap things around it, and so on. In programs like InDesign now, you just set a bunch of specifications for your drop cap, and there it is. So that's a great one. The expanding the capacities of find and change are also huge. And again, it's these are things that are very geeky and not thought of as creative at all until they end up in a creative arts program like InDesign. And then people stop thinking of them as this scary automation thing and start thinking of them as just, it's a feature.
Yeah, that just blew my mind when I got to meet the InDesign team and talk to them about what really goes on. I didn't know about optical kerning and the paragraph composer, and there's so much in there that's really like it's trying to be a typesetter. And then probably the classic form of automation that everyone knows to some extent. If you think of automating InDesign, you would probably think of data-driven content. So things like catalogs, directories, brochures, cruise booklets that are personalized. InDesign Server does an awesome job of spitting out personalized content in the traditional sense of data-driven stuff that's flowing data through containers. So in the case of Royal Caribbean Cruises, we automated their system a long time ago, and it's still running. They press a button and they get 10,000 cruise booklets out in short order, and they're all personalized. They have different pages, different numbers of pages, different sections, depending on who you are and what cruise you bought. And again, so the level of automation can be extreme, and the level of personalization can be supported by it. And that's one of the more traditional flavors of creative automation. Again, only workflow automation is really something I know you have evangelized for many years. Can you explain workflow automation and things people still might not be familiar with there?
Oh, well, it's a lot of stuff that in some ways we don't think about it too much, but there's a lot of stuff in graphic design and layout that is repetitive. For example, in a given magazine, you might have a little logo for the magazine that appears at the end of every story. That's really easily automated. And it's the thing about adding automation features like scripting or actions is that everything is very specific to you, your workflow, and your particular kinds of publications. And so there's no one size fits all solution. You could wait, forever for Adobe to add just exactly the thing that will help you, say, resize the spine of your book to match the number of pages in the book, which also match the paper weight that you're using. But with automation, it's fairly easy to custom tailor that just to you and your workflow and your work. So there's a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, anytime people list out steps, that we find people who don't automate enough, and they come to us with literally 35 steps. So first we put the bullets on the page, then we align them according to this thing and many times these steps can turn into a sequence of programming tasks that can be done in JavaScript. But it's shocking to me how we every day find another company that is not automating as much as they could. But the extensibility of InDesign is really amazing.
Sure. It's a creative field, but a lot of the work in the field is anything but creative. You spend a lot of time just doing the same thing over and over again. And automation is really the one thing that can free you from that work so that you can get back to the creative side of your work.
So yeah, creative automation can also actually generate art and content, and it can the programs can now interpret images, and we've always done stuff like analyze the white space available, but it's scary what's happening these days in terms of the amazing quality of AI-based tools. Generating art is one thing. These were generated with scripts that we give away, by the way. You can ask for them if you want, but this is just art created from a few parameters in an algorithm that creates gorgeous art. There are tools built into Adobe now that are using AI to analyze images. For instance, the Adobe Sensei is a tool for artificial intelligence, and it is now interfaced with the Adobe desktop tools to talk to them and inform them. So Mike, can you speak to this?
Well, I think this is a good example where a lot of the artificial intelligence of Sensei right now is focused more on images and video, but recognizing where the subject is and then understanding where to place it in the frame. This is what you're seeing going on in this example here. But there's many other, I would say, little areas where we're improving through AI, and I expect much more of this to be available to our users in the coming years.
Great. Yeah, we wonder if there's still going to be designers after this.
Oh yeah,
I think they will. So yeah, anyway, to summarize, the automation is everywhere you look in creative tooling and software these days, and that's the fourth of the trends. So looking at them in context, in the real subject of online editing, let's look at a couple, actually 3 different scenarios, but mainly the first 2. Branded collateral is one extreme case, and creative freedom, those are 2 really opposite extremes of editing, although most editing is somewhere in the middle. Classic use case for branded collateral is the real estate industry, and brand for any large company is known as a critical thing. And we've been amazed as we work with the extremely large clients. We have clients from tiny one-person mom and pop, one-person show companies all the way up to Fortune 10 companies. And the bigger they are, the more obsessed they are with brand generally. And so we've seen brand guidelines that are over 100 pages long. And I would have thought the font and the colors and the logo are probably enough. But no, there's style. Some people have pages and pages about the voice, not just one voice, but not the voice of the company, but the voice of the company on different channels. So the social media channel will be different than the advertising channel, et cetera. And so the brand really is something that companies obsess over. And it probably, has merit. It probably means, that's how you're recognized and you get a name like Apple or Nike. And designers are central to this. Designers often are like the brand police. They enforce it, and I've also seen designers that are just like, no, that's not the spacing we use in this context, and so they really care. Salespeople, not so much. Salespeople care mainly about speed and sales, getting it done, getting it out, and so that's a natural collision. And the worst case, which we've seen over and over, is salespeople trying to make their own collateral. And this is often why people come to us to automate a design solution, because if they make their own collateral, they can make their own mistakes. And boy, did they make mistakes! They're proud of it. They can make a terrible document that destroys the brand, that just attacks the notion of brand itself or readability. This is literally colors that someone chose for their real estate document. A real person chose those colors for the red and blue. And so, they're at odds with the marketing who are trying to desperately enforce the brand. And this is like the slam dunk use case for an online design solution. It's one of the most easy things to do. So of the InDesign Server solutions we see, this is the easier one. This is not as hard to solve as the creative. I'll show you that one. This can be accomplished with InDesign Server. And Mike, I know you've seen not just us, but many companies succeed with this. I mean, designers can create a template, and the salesperson does not have to think about font or color or logo. They don't get to be creative. They don't get to go to town. And most of them don't really want to be designing. They don't want to learn InDesign. I've been doing this 20 years. I still can't learn InDesign. It's a very tough product to learn. So they want to just change the content. And with InDesign Server, they get a literal perfect InDesign document. So they're actually a lot more successful than they would have been had they taken Word out and loaded Comic Sans font and all that. So the brand is retained, and they can get this out instantly. And they're getting out, one piece. Those same edits might apply to 10 pieces or 5 things, different sizes, and they might not even know about it. But when they create one piece, it can go elsewhere as well. So I'll show you a very simple, hopefully the most simple demo. This is a realtor who found out that he wants to rent the property. They're changing from sale to rental, and so they're going to change the price to to $2,000 a month. And they're just typing. They're typing in a form in plain text. And as I type, this is updating InDesign Server. This is an InDesign template built in Adobe InDesign, and a very simple app really has enabled a salesperson to quickly update what they need to update, which is just the content. They could upload an image and swap the image and maybe crop it. It can get involved, but really it's quite powerful to take an InDesign file and simply change the content dimension of it and update it for use in publishing. And for all he knows, he's made a flyer and a business card or whatever from this same effort. So that is very much a slam dunk use case in this field.
So that's an editor running in a web browser, driving InDesign Server on the back end.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to see it go so fast after all these years. And Oli and others contributed to make this happen. I mean, InDesign Server is the most powerful rendition tool. It wasn't always the fastest because it's doing so much. The paragraph composer and the optical kerning and all that has its overhead. But it's been getting faster by virtue of hardware and also by virtue of hard work by people like us to perfect every last nuance of speeding it up and scaling it. So we see people getting 600 documents in a second or millions of documents in a few minutes out of it nowadays.
Yeah,
So
things can
go ahead.
look a little bit slow when we're doing it during a screen share meeting sort of thing, but it can go really fast. Also, a lot of our solutions don't rely on hitting the server all of the time. For our main solutions, we only hit the server when we actually need a serious render, and everything else can take place on screen.
Yeah, we'll see that in the next use case. So as far as the branded use case, and really when it's separating content from presentation, the editing is about the content inside of a well-built template that some designer made in InDesign. How do the 4 trends apply? Well, they all apply to some extent. The one that is least applicable and used is crowdsourcing. In a more branded context, you'll almost never crowdsource the templates themselves. The templates are, for a good reason, designed by people who know the brand, and it's hard to train the entire universe in your brand. And yet some things are crowdsourced, and those would be maybe the stock photos, or maybe some dimension of the process has some crowdsourcing going on. But that's the one that's sort of dormant here. The other 3 are absolutely happening. This is DIY in its extreme, where a salesperson now doesn't have to fax changes to a design team. They can just go online and make their stuff and get it out immediately. The repurposing is, again, happening often behind the scenes, or as an automated process. When you assign variables for the objects you're editing, it can go from a postcard onto a billboard or whatever. And creative automation is happening at different steps of the way, often behind the scenes. But maybe that's how that photo got placed. The things inside of the tools are often happening, with very little human effort. Sometimes people don't even know what's happening to make things work under the hood. So that's the first use case as far as editing. The second, and the one that's been fun for us and challenging, is the freeform creative authoring. In the freeform world, you really want a full-blown editor. It's hard to define the limits. If you're really going to get creative, what is the difference between a desktop design app and a web-based creative editor? It's a continuum. There are reasons you do some things differently on the web or in a specific context. And one of the cool things about the web-based tools is that they can be different for different people. But we really start to see web apps becoming just as powerful as desktop apps, and you even see desktop apps going up on the web. This is just last week, Adobe announced the Photoshop beta for Photoshop on the web. Mike, do you want to speak to Adobe's direction with software on the web?
Clearly, I guess the market wants to see more and more of tooling available through a web browser, and you've seen this with maybe more traditional tools. I think in a lot of ways Google paved the way with Google Docs, and Microsoft has kind of followed in more recent years with the Office 365. Adobe started with the Creative Cloud, about 8 years ago. And initially that was more about delivering our software through the cloud, but now we're starting to re-engineer the products so you can actually use them in a browser. We also have done some things to take some of the products to tablets. So there's a version for iPad for both Photoshop and Illustrator, but we're going to start to see these tools be exposed in the browser. I think one of the things that's interesting about that surface is, it's an opportunity to change the way you think about the UI and interacting with a user that's not working on local file systems, working more on cloud systems. So I see this as kind of a longer term trend that's absolutely happening. And I'd love to fast forward 10 or 15 years from now to see, what tasks are still done on desktop versus through a browser.
Yeah, it's stunning. We've been working in this space a long time, and it's just wonderful to see the progress and the power of browsers. So the other thing about creative editing, most creative editing on the web does use templates as it currently stands, and as people are currently doing things. Almost all of our work depends on templates, and people aren't starting from scratch and building from zero. But they could, they can, and they do sometimes. So some of our clients have absolutely blank templates. And then when you have that, you need tools. You can't really easily do things yourself, such as align objects. There are things where the tools get more sophisticated and more complex if you're really trying to create from scratch. And in a creative authoring experience, like I'm about to show, the user might think there are no constraints, and they might feel like there are no constraints, but there are many constraints going on in a real editor, because, for example, if a school child is editing a yearbook page, they may well put an image that's way low DPI, and we have tools and others have tools that prevent that. They say, wait a minute, you can't use that image, you can't scale it that big because now you're at 14 DPI, it's going to be a little pixelated. And so there are constraints like that, like placing bleeds in proper position to be either effectively off the page or within the page. And there are constraints that do come along, even though you feel like you're completely free. Oli, do you have examples of validation that we do in our work to help a user make a successful document?
Sure. Well, the high resolution, the low resolution warning is a great one. Then things about a lot of our work ends up on a printing press or a high-speed printer of some sort. And there are various things that we need to watch for there. Bleeds are a good one. I mean, Max has pretty much covered it already. But we're always guiding people toward something that will print, or that will be possible to turn into HTML. So just things like that. And then there's a whole lot of, as you'd expect, font management stuff when you go out to the web. There's not just having the fonts available. There's the legal aspect of, can they actually use these fonts, and stuff like that. So there's a whole lot of guiding that goes on even in a freeform environment.
Yeah, and let's see what those. The tools we build are quite powerful, and it's taken a long time to make this happen. The sort of form-based InDesign Server solution, we had those running the day after InDesign Server came out. But something like this, you're actually letting users edit content, kind of like InDesign. It's usually something that you'd want to be easier than InDesign, because again, InDesign is not trivial to learn. But our traditional designer tool, which we built starting in 2006, takes the whole InDesign model and maps it to HTML5, to where you can do quite amazing things. You can edit in the context of rendition. I mean, you're editing right on the page. If you're going to edit text, you select that text and see it change. And so I can make a document pretty quickly. And make type edits right on the canvas. I can drag and drop images. So this is a typical kind of editing solution where this is a hard thing to build, but it's very powerful and empowering to the user, because they can really create something with complete design control over the design parameters. They're not just editing the content of it outside of the browser. They're actually changing design intent. They're changing styles. I could change the font of one word, or raise the point size of one word. And it's really neat. This has been our joy, and we did this a long time ago. We did this in like 2006, because at that point in time, it would have taken 3 or 4 seconds for InDesign to return a document from a content change. So back in the day, it was required almost to have WYSIWYG just to have a good experience, and that made us model the entire, take the entire design model and bring it into a web browser. And that's been an art of ours, and we did sort of the hard thing first. But this is a use case where the people have creative freedom, and with that freedom, they have to control themselves. There then is the chance that they'll make some document terrible. They have the freedom to screw up a brand, but you know, no pain, no gain. They can make their own yearbook page absolutely 100% their own. There's really no limit to what you can do. And like I said, tools help. So if I add 2 objects to a page, I'm going to want to select 2 of those objects, you know, and align them, because that's just, you know, enforcing some order from somewhere. So things like grid lines, snap to grid, margin guides, things you'd use in a desktop tool come into play to make this a controlled editing experience, where you actually can succeed at making a design document relatively quickly that's got absolute flexibility, and you can really control every object on the page. So this is really sort of the creative extreme. And then, as we'll see, there are hybrids in between branded and creative.
Wanted to say that we work a lot with type in the browser, and there are definite limitations when you're trying to bring InDesign typesetting into the HTML5 typesetting world. The web definitely lags behind the desktop world in terms of type. I'd say HTML5 is about where typesetting and desktop publishing was around 1989. It's still very crude, and but that in some ways makes it easy, since we're going from InDesign to the web and then back to InDesign. InDesign's typesetting tools are a superset of what's available in HTML5. So we dumb it down just enough to get it to work in HTML5 and then back to InDesign. So,
but that's another power of Indesign Server, that we can also have a best of both worlds. So if you have, for example, text on a path, which is barely selectable in HTML5, SVG has a very limited flavor of selectable text on a path. InDesign has incredibly robust text on a path. So what do? You type into a form. You have server-side rendition in that case. So we can do anything InDesign does on the server. We can do a large subset of InDesign round trip between client and server. And with the speed of InDesign now, that can really make a great experience for people, because we can really use the power that's there at will. But it's hard and it's subtle to divide the two. And yeah,
sure. And we've studied the Composer systems in all of the major browsers, and can characterize Silicon Designer that we were looking at there for the composition in a particular browser, and still get matching text output on the InDesign server side. So that's really a lot of our work is around making type work right, or as close as we can get it to right in the browser context.
yes, and it's a fun game. So with Freeform Creative, the 4 trends are pretty much all there. The only one that's a little less prominent is the content repurposing. You know, a lot of times if you're creating something from scratch and something that's unique, it might not be something that's going everywhere to every channel. So the multi-channel automated publishing is a little more challenging when you've got total creativity at the front end of the process. Finally, hybrid solutions. I don't have much here, but the idea of a hybrid solution is twofold. There can be intermediary places where someone might combine a very constrained experience with a more freeform one. And there are certainly places where you might have two different options for editing depending on what kind of content it is. For instance, in a portal for a brand, they might be making, very branded collateral, and they might be making social media posts. And maybe in the case of the social media post, they're going to want to find a fairly empty template and customize it to their will without wanting to be constrained at all, because they're going to feed the TikTok feed or the Instagram of the company, and they have much more relaxed brand guidelines when they get to that place. So the hybrid solutions are kind of like when you want to do both in one application, or if you have different user classes, where in some cases you would want to have a designer able to change everything about a page, but a salesperson or a legal person only able to change the things that they have control over and only change the content, not the presentation. So we're running out of time, and I don't have conclusions written up or the future predicted, but I would say these trends are going to continue. And like Oli said, the newer things that we see are in dimensional products and things like that. And we don't know where VR will take us or the metaverse will take us, but that's already a thing for us, and we're already involved. And those things seem to go hand in hand. The people who are pioneering 3 dimensions are also the people pioneering virtual worlds in many cases. So that's what I see in the future. Mike, tell us what Adobe's planning for the next 10 years.
Well, I think you'll see us bring more tools to the web. You'll see simpler tools from Adobe. Adobe Spark is a really good example of that. And and I also think how you connect these tools together and work across different cloud platforms is another thing that I think a lot of companies are working on, not just Adobe.
And Oli, what inspires you these days for future? Where would you see designer going if you could plan things?
Oh, well, I mean, more automation in terms of understanding the rules of a particular piece, whether it's printed or online or 3D printed or laser cut or whatever. Designers know the rules of a piece, whether they think about them consciously or not. I mean, when I put on my graphic design hat, there's a whole lot of just implicit understanding of the way a particular document works. Like, this is a headline, it relates to that graphic in this way, and the text follows it in a particular, it's separated by some white space that tells the reader that there's a change in the hierarchy of the document there. So what we did with desktop publishing was move the graphic design world from a paste up board onto the computer screen, but then we sort of stopped. So the development that's been going on since then is getting our software tools to understand the documents, the layouts, the way that the designer does, so that there's an understanding of the structure, the sort of the conceptual structure of the piece. And I think we'll see more and more smarter templates that know that if you move this element, these other elements need to move and stuff. This was actually stuff that we worked on at when I was at Visio in the early 90s, establishing what are the rules of this document and how does it conceptually work. I think we'll see AI more capable of understanding how things in a layout work and suggesting styles that can be applied across the different heading levels, things like that. And then I also think there's huge stuff going on in 3D printing and laser cutting and all that nice sort of personal manufacturing stuff that's going on in the maker space.
Great. Okay, I think that's it for the presentation, and we're on to Q&A in our last few minutes. We have a question: is Silicon Designer suitable for a freelancer or small design shop who wants to allow their clients to do some editing of ID files online? Or is it mainly for deep pocket enterprises? That's a great question. And sadly, as of right now, Silicon Designer is an expensive product. It's not something for everybody, but it's getting there over time, and we have aspiration to bring it to a broader market over time. It's fun to work on that, and that's definitely what we're working on. So we're working towards a version for individuals. And at this point, though, it's pretty expensive, and it's a system. You know, our biggest barrier in bringing it down to everybody is making it absolutely trivial for people to use it. You know, when we contemplated selling Silicon Designer for $1 a month, customer service is everything. How can you make it so easy for someone to work with this tool that they don't call you? If they call us once, we've lost money, right? So that's our challenge: is can we make a bulletproof, easy to use thing that is doing, you know, round trip online editing of a WYSIWYG you know, scenario with fonts and with everything working perfectly. Well, it's very easy to screw up templates. It's very easy to not have a font. It's very easy to do all sorts of things wrong with publishing. So we're kind of taking on the responsibility of what Adobe had with InDesign and their customer service. They don't sell InDesign that cheap because they have serious customer support, and they've had the luxury of investing, you know, many millions of dollars over years and years and years to refine that product to where it's nearly bulletproof. But Mike, you still have customer support, don't you?
Yeah, yes, of course. Yeah.
Another question: is this just for creating PDFs? Is this still necessary if we print less and less and do more digital? That's a great question. No, it's absolutely not for PDFs, and it's kind of like InDesign too, that we get a bum rap because we do print. You know, it's like, oh, that's just print. That's the extinct thing that's dying off and going away. Well, I know of a large company that has 4,000 seats of InDesign right now that aren't used for PDF or print at all. They're using it for infographics because it happens to have the precision and typography and the graphic chops that no other tool has for infographics. So no, we see print as the harder thing. If you can do print, you can certainly do a social media post or a web page or a web banner with bells on. Another question: if we need our salespeople to customize content, can our team be restricted as to what images they can use? For sure. Yes, that's the beauty of automation, and the thing about this, they can be restricted from any angle, at the application level, at the user level, at the page object level. You know, so we see with the yearbook space, there are fields that are for mascots, and then if they click on that image to replace it, they'll get a selection of mascot images. There are fields that are for school pictures, and they'll get that. It can know who you are. When you logged in, it knew what school you were in. So that can be very granular. Another question: can a system like this be integrated with other enterprise systems like DAM and CRM? Very much so, and that's the beauty of how it's all built. When you look at a designer implementation, or, you know, this is really not about designer as much as online editing. Almost any online editor is going to have a library, a gallery of images, and these images are consumed from a RESTful service call that might be to our gallery, but it might be to any gallery. So the integration points are the fun aspect of things. The objects on the page have metadata. This could say what it is if it were stored in a DAM. And so, yes, it's a beautiful modular world now with online editing where these tools can integrate with almost anything. And they're usually using RESTful services to do that. One more question. When they're done, can we associate the document with a CRM record for the customer? Yes, that's the cool thing. Again, these tools these days are very easy to interface, and that's really the power of it. It's a module. I think we were smart to just focus on this kind of module, and many of our partners and friends in the industry have done the same. We could have built CRMs ourselves or shopping carts or marketing portals, but we built a component that can be connected to those. And that's kind of the current trend. So Brett, are there any more questions? I think that's it.
I think we hit them all.
That's it. Then if you need further information or want to talk to us, we're friendly and accessible. You can email sales at Silicon Publishing, even though it says sales. We don't necessarily pitch sales every time. We are informational as well. Our blog has information, and our Twitter is SiliconP.